Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Welcome back to Kingdomize, the podcast. This is going to be a great time together. About 30 minutes. You've got 30 minutes. Just relax. Everything's going to be good. I'm here with my good friend, Bruce Mann, who is our kingdom leadership guru. He's the mentor of mentors. He is the man that knows everything. He knows everything. Any question you have about leadership, he has the answer. He does. So Bruce, no pressure, but this should be a good day. And,
no pressure at all.
This is the second of 10 lessons of our kingdom leadership with Bruce. So, fantastic. We did a foundation last week, and we're going to jump right in today to authentic spirituality. Authentic spirituality. That, my friend, is a mouthful. Authentic spirituality. What is that? What is authentic spirituality?
Well, it needs to be defined, because someone might think, well, am I or am I not spiritual, or am I or am I not a Christian? That's not really what we're referencing here. It's really more about, am I living out my relationship with Christ, with God, in an authentically impactful way, the way that God would have us live out our lives. Our good friend Paul Gibbs talks about that God not only redeems us, but he also recruits us.
Right.
And so how can God use us effectively, or how can we effectively participate in extending his kingdom in a way? And I would propose that we have to live out authentically spiritual lives. We're not on human beings on a spiritual journey. We're spiritual beings on a human journey. And so we need to understand, well, what does it mean? And really what we're talking about, authentic spirituality, we're talking about maturity and completeness. And we never do this perfectly. We know that, but we can grow and become more aware, more mature, more complete, and therefore more authentic or real in our walk with Christ and in our ability to influence God's kingdom.
That sounds really hard. That sounds like a long and hard journey. I bet there's some secrets to being able to do this well, because that sounds long and hard.
Yeah, well, I would probably, a good launching point for us to understand is, obviously we receive our salvation as a free gift. We know that. We didn't earn it. It's by God's grace. We appropriate it through the work that Jesus did. But the discipleship part, the transformative part, comes by the renewing of the mind. We know that from, Romans 12 talks about that we are transformed by the renewing of our mind. And so we need to take the time to really think through and understand, what does it mean? How do I begin to change the way I think, and therefore change the way I lead? Because we all lead in some capacity, either formally or informally. How do I lead out of that transformative, transformed understanding of who I am, who God is, and the world around me? How do I engage with the world around me?
Yeah. That's really good. That's a great foundational scripture there to talk about, because that Romans 12 thing, it is a change of mind so we can change our actions. So it includes all those things. So let's move right into the three main points, and I love them. I love when we have these chats together about these three main points. So you're going to talk today, Bruce, about vision, voice, and values. Vision, voice, and values, the three main areas of authentic spirituality. So let's just jump in on vision.
Okay.
Talk to me about that.
Okay, let me start by just saying I'm grateful to Dale Burke, who wrote a really great book called Less is More Leadership. And I've gained this sort of, using his illustration, and have expanded on it. My wife and I take time to use this same illustration with married couples who, in terms of fashioning their marriage around having vision, voice, and values. So let me start into this, and we're going to take a little bit of time to kind of unpack it. But let me start by saying, it's a compelling vision for life, the listening to one clear voice and living out of unchanging values. Okay. So I qualify those three pieces: vision, voice, and values. We're going to look at another element in the next section on humility, and how humility, as we bring these three elements together, they're like gears that mesh and help us move through life, but they need to be greased. The gears need grease, and the grease is humility. Okay. Because we don't get it. We don't. I want to qualify this right off the bat and say, we never get this perfect. Okay. We never get it, but we can grow in it, and we can learn and understand. So let's dive in. We're going to start with this idea of a compelling vision. And I want to push back, if I can, on this understanding that somehow it's my vision. God gives me a vision, and I'm going to live it out, and I'm going to do great things. It's kind of backwards. This vision at the highest level, the highest altitude, is God's vision. His vision to redeem and reconcile the world, to see his influence, his attributes, his kingdom influence the entire world, that his kingdom would come and his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we're going to start from the first part and the vision, but I want to qualify this to say it's God's vision. It's not my vision. And so I'm going to use a little illustration, and hopefully this works. We're going to try this on.
I've been looking forward to this. This is
so I have this. I use this illustration, and I'm grateful for someone who actually helped me with this. You can see this bowl. It's going to be right there in front of me here.
I see the bowl.
It's the big bowl. This is the big bowl. And this big bowl is God's vision to redeem, reconcile, and restore the world so that his kingdom would permeate every area of life. So we start the big bowl. So let me break this down. It's God's vision, not mine. I didn't create this idea of reconciling the world through the redemptive work of Jesus and seeing God's kingdom established. So I need to know that, first of all, it's God's vision, but then I need to understand, okay, where do I fit into this? What's my part in it? And so I'm going to bring in another bowl. This is the next bowl, and it fits inside the big bowl. I would call this bowl my purpose. Okay. This is the second piece. As I grow to understand God's vision, that allows me to know my purpose in helping and partnering with God to see his vision realized. And I would reference, really, Jesus is always a reference in these areas of servanthood.
Almost always the answer is Jesus.
Yeah, the right answer is always Jesus. But we see in Jesus something that should be very helpful for us. And that is, and we see it in John chapter 12, verse 27, and then again in John 18, 37, where Jesus is agonizing in the garden. And he's saying, God, if you can take this cup from me, please do. But not your will, not my will, but your will be done. And then we, as we move through that story of that set, watching the account of Jesus being captured, tried, he's standing before Pilate. He's silent before Pilate, not even answering questions until Pilate says, "Are you a king? Are you a king?" And at that question, Jesus responds, and he responds with a very clear and definite, "Yes, I am a king. And for this very reason, I was born. Yeah. I've come to be a king." Obviously misunderstood. Everyone misunderstood what that meant. But Jesus, at his most critical moment, understood his purpose. And because of that, he could fit into God's vision for restoration, redemption of the world. And so I need to understand my purpose so that I can fit into God's vision and participate in his kingdom. We use terms like ambassadors. We can be servants. We can be ambassadors. We engage in God's vision to see his vision achieved. And I can only do that as I understand my purpose. So that compelling vision isn't mine, it's God's. I just need to learn to grow and understand, well, what's my purpose? And there are ways of doing that. We won't have time today to go into it. But it goes beyond that. Well, once I know my purpose.
It's a Ginsu commercial. There's more, isn't there?
There's more.
Is there more bowls?
There's another bowl. So this bowl I'm going to call this mission.
All right.
Right? God gives me missions. He gives me assignments. And over the course of my life, I've had several different assignments. One of my assignments is to be a dad and a husband. One of my assignments was I was in a business for a while, and that was an assignment. Then I moved into a children's ministry, children's camping ministry. For many years, I was involved in Christian camping as a mission. But I've had several different missions in my life, and sometimes they're accomplished, and you move on to the next one, or God moves you and transitions you. So knowing God's vision never changes. My purpose, who I am, who God's made me to be, really never changed. He's wired me a certain way. I have to grow and understand that. But this is once I know those things, then I can engage in missions. I can also know that's not where I should be. Right. It helps me make decisions. I'm not wired for that. Why would I go there? It helps me. One more bowl.
No way. Not another one.
There's another one.
Oh, this is great. I love this.
Here's the last bowl.
Just 1 second, Bruce. Just 1 second, Bruce. If you're listening to this podcast and driving, you may want to pull over and watch these bowls. Fantastic.
What's this bowl? Well, this bowl is goals, right? These are the things that help you achieve your mission. And so once I know God's vision, that compelling vision, and know my purpose, or a growing understanding of my purpose, then I can know which assignments I'm fitted for, and say yes to them with confidence. And within that mission, there are goals. So if you think about, I'll put this to the side, but the nesting bowls illustration works for me. I hope it's helpful for people.
No, that's great.
Think about it in the military sense of how do we engage in military assignments, right? Nobody sends an army out on a vision, right? Nobody sends, no commanding officer goes to his troops and says, hey, I've got a vision for you.
Yeah.
Go out. I have this vision of you going out. They go on missions, but the mission is guided by the vision, and the vision isn't ours, it's God's. I always want to come back to that. And so understand, for me, and I hope this is helpful to people, understanding God's vision, my purpose, the missions I'm assigned to, and the goals within those missions should give us clarity in order that we can engage in the assignments and the purposes that God has made us for.
Yeah.
Now, that's one part of all this. This compelling vision, God's vision. I am, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later on, but I steward that. I don't own it.
Right.
I'm not my own. It's not mine. It's God's vision. It's my purpose, yes, but it's what God has given me, the gifting and calling and that. So, but that's incomplete. I need more. I need to really have an authentic expression of the spirit life that God wants active in me. So let's move on to the next piece. And that is, I need to have the ability to hear God's voice, because I may have a map that says, here's the mission, here's your purpose, here's the mission, here's where you want to get to. But I still need direction. I need that ability to hear God's voice and course correct and respond in certain scenarios where I need more than just human understanding. Right. So we have a compelling vision, but to complement that and to work in that, we need to hear God's voice, that clear voice that says, go this way, or don't go here. And that requires some intentionality. And that's why I said this is something that we become discipled in. It's we're transformed by the renewing of our mind, and this is how we engage, right? So we'll go back to that. I think Jesus is a fabulous example here. If God's Son needed time alone, needed to carve out space for him to hear his Father's voice, how much more do we need that?
Yeah.
So
really
the
good
discipline of, well, first of all, knowing our purpose and the mission God's called us to, but then carving out time to hear God's voice is absolutely fundamental to really achieving and having an authentic spirituality. So we have this vision. Now we have the voice. Brian, you champion this all the time, and it's talking about that God is a good father, and good fathers speak to their children.
Right.
Right. And so what I've learned, and maybe you've had similar, I grew up with a dad who on occasion could yell, who could get agitated and make his will known. And I don't say that to be derogatory. I love my dad, and he was a great father. But like me, he was human and on occasion could lose it. But my experience with my heavenly Father is he doesn't yell very often.
Right. Right.
He's not a screamer.
Yeah.
He's usually pretty subtle and quiet in the way he gives direction. Maybe not always, and maybe others have experienced differently.
I think my experience, he's usually subtle until I ignore him, and then he increased, and he's really kind and compassionate to everyone because that's how he starts. But to get his kids at times, he goes, "Hey, I'm going to up the ante here." But I totally agree with you.
And I think God prefers, if he does yell, it's usually because we're being a little bit hard to get. He's hard to get our attention.
Right. I would often say that God only disciplines us when we don't discipline ourselves. Right.
Yeah.
So there are times he has to. That voice gets a little louder, if you will, because we didn't listen the first time. But
for sure.
You're going. Yeah.
So I think my response to that would be, if we're being intentional about taking time and space for God to speak to us, it would mean he wouldn't have to yell at us very often.
Yeah.
The yelling part would go.
Maybe I'll just add a thing here, Bruce. It's been helpful for me and others as I've taught this under the hearing the voice of God thing, is that we understand that the Bible is God's voice. It's his word, right? The Bible. We understand that Jesus is a living word. So the word is the Bible. The word is Jesus, the living word. So we would do, what would Jesus do moments and go, wow, what would Jesus do? But lots of life is lived in that, well, there's no first book of Brian in the Bible. I can't read this, or a second Bruce. So it's that need for the word to become Holy Spirit in us too. And that only develops out of intentionality, as you said, out of discipline and following what Jesus did by separating yourself and getting quiet and going, I know the voice of God. And he only did what he saw the Father doing. It was his lifestyle, right? So
I think God, speaks to different people in different ways at different times. And so it's, as a student of God's, who God is in my life, I need to become aware of how he speaks, and grow in that. And obviously that's an area of maturity that over time, and again, we don't do it perfectly. And so we need to have humility functioning. Again, we're going to look at that in more detail next time.
Yeah.
But
you've also said, Bruce, you've got a whole lesson on this when you talk about Sabbath, right? Later on in the course, lesson on Sabbath, we'll go a little deeper on what it looks like in time and space to hear God, right? So
totally.
So keep this moving for today. So you've got the compelling vision, you've got a clear voice. So let's talk about unchanging values. Let's go there as our third point. Unchanging values.
So we hear a lot about values, don't we? It's a kind of a catch thing. Companies have value statements. Some people have personal value statements. And so this would be one of the gears, one of those things that have to mesh together. The vision, the voice, and the values have to come together. So one of the things we need to ask ourselves is, the values we live our life out of, are they aligned with God's values? Are they aligned with God's kingdom's values?
Right.
Because they should be non-negotiables. Values don't change because of where I am or who I'm talking to. We don't have business values, family values, community values. They're just the things that are valued. Now, values are the things that are important. They're the things that matter. They're the things that keep us running true. Priorities are the things that are the highest importance, the highest impact.
Right.
So we need to understand the difference between priorities and values, because we can get those things mixed up. But let's focus on values here for a moment. They're non-negotiable. Here's the thing, that your values, it's one thing to say, I want to be an honest person. But if I'm cheating on my taxes, or if I'm lying, that means I actually don't value honesty. I'm living my values out every day. So in that sense, our values are not what we aspire to necessarily. they're who we are right now. And we have to be brutally honest with ourselves sometimes and say, I'm not living the values that are really reflective of God's kingdom. Am I making decisions out of fear? Am I making decisions out of selfish pursuits and desires? So we really have to be brutally honest with ourselves as we kind of analyze. And so it's because here's the thing, we don't get up in the morning very often and go, oh God, what's your compelling vision for my life today? We reflect on it. It influences us. We make it a revelation here and there that kind of gives us, a great foundation to build from. But between the time you get up in the morning and you get to your job or you get to whatever you're making hundreds of value decisions every moment of the day that are reflecting in some capacity what what is the essence of what you're living out, the reasons why you're doing what you're doing. And so it's the place where most of life is lived out, and it's the seedbed of most of the outcomes in life.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is incredibly important, and we don't have time today to start getting granular on what are the values of God's kingdom. We'll get into that as we move through the sessions. But as a leader, am I making decisions that are reflecting accurately the attributes of God's kingdom? Am I living them out, and am I willing to make those hard decisions, the ones that cost me, to remain, have uncompromised values? This is sort of the ground zero of life, isn't it? So
yeah, for sure. So I've often considered this under the banner of, we know the values of the kingdom. Like, it wouldn't take long to break into the values of the kingdom. So I would just go to, let's say, Romans 14, righteousness, peace, and joy. That's what Apostle Paul says. So let's say it's those three. There's a difference between having, here's what it looks like, and then the gap between what I'm living, like that values gap. And that happens for me personally. That happens in a church. That happens in a business. How do we break? I'm not asking that today because I know we're going to do it, but I'm just trying to bring a clarification here, is that how do you bridge that gap between how we know the values we're supposed to live and what we're really doing? That's the hundreds of choices you're talking about, right?
Totally, yeah. And we'll get into that when we talk about humility, because we do have to come to the place. Humility is multifaceted, and we won't go into it right now, but one of the attributes of humility is to say, yeah, I got that wrong today. I need to correct that. I need to own it. I need to understand, and that's where repentance, that's where comes in, and that's not a defeat. It's an evidence of a mature, authentic spirituality that is rooted in an understanding of God's kingdom. Right? Yes. It's coming out of our understanding, and so the reason why we group vision, voice, and values together is partly because you can't really grasp God's vision for reconciliation and redemption without living the values of that redemption. Right?
Yeah.
So by that I mean, we can become in our society and kind of the typical approach to life in most cases is very task oriented.
Right.
I don't think God's kingdom is task oriented in the pure sense. Yes, there are objectives. Yes, God has a vision, but moving parallel with what he hopes to achieve is how we treat people, how we value people. And so, just the end in God's kingdom, the end does not justify the means. The means and the goal have to flow and function together and bring honor to God, the essence of who God is. And the attributes of his kingdom need to be displayed. And that's why we need a new scorecard, in terms of understanding what does success look like in God's kingdom.
Yeah.
Is it just always...
You've got a whole session on that, right? We're going to talk about
totally.
that, so we'll get there. So once again, talk to me about these gears, talk to me about the oil, and then we're going to wrap it up. Okay. So the gears are what, the oil is what, and then let's wrap it up with a pretty bow.
Okay, so if you think about the illustration of gears that are meshing together.
Yeah.
I'm just submitting to people to think about the fact that if I have a deep understanding of God's vision for his kingdom and the redemptive restorative work of it, if I'm hearing his voice,
yeah,
and if I'm living out the values of his kingdom, that's an authentic expression of the life, the essence of life, that spiritual life that God wants in his people.
So we need all three.
We need all three, and we need lubricating the gears. I think if you can imagine this, we need that humility that understands that we don't get this perfect all the time. We don't always get it right.
Yeah.
And we have to have an awareness of that. And God has provided within his kingdom a means and a way for us to function in this less than perfect state.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that, for me, that as I, on a personal level, as I think of my own life and how I lead people, how I lead in the various areas that I lead in life, family, as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, as a leader within an organizational setting, am I expressing these three areas in an effective way?
Yeah.
The essence of these three, and this is where we want to kind of bring it to a bit of an application, and that we'll use the parable of the talents that most people are very familiar with, is that the essence of this is that I am a steward. I've been entrusted with something. I've been entrusted with this great vision of seeing the world redeemed and reconciled and God's kingdom established. He has given me the incredible bonus of his voice when I ask and when I take time to listen. And he's clearly delineated what are the values of that kingdom. And so I can participate as a steward, not as an owner, because the reality in God's kingdom, ownership kills. It destroys, because it puts the emphasis and the onus on things that are not necessarily going to be helpful in God's kingdom. And we'll see this in the parable of the talent, because for me to be willing to have that, to have authentic spirituality, I actually have to have an authentic stewardship understanding.
Yeah,
it's not mine. I was given it as a gift. I'm called into it as a gift, not as a something that I can claim ownership of. And so when I come into it that way, it helps me maintain a good frame of mind, a good understanding of how do I engage in this idea of seeing God's kingdom extended and lead in an appropriate way. Parable of Talents for me is so revealing. We all know it. There's an owner, there's a master. He gives some of his assets to 3 servants. 2 of them double what they received, and then one, is fearful. He's overly cautious, however you want to describe it, buries the seed, gives his master back what he gave him in the first place. And we won't focus on that servant, but the 2 that doubled it. It's what's interesting to me, and sometimes we may misunderstand this a little bit in because of our ownership, our propensity to think towards ownership. Like somehow what the master gave these first 2 servants was theirs. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't theirs. They were stewards of it. And they used it wisely. They engaged in it wisely, and they doubled what they were given. And the reward wasn't the master coming and saying, "Hey, you did great. It's all yours. Take it. The reward was, excellent. I'm going to give you more things to do.
Yeah. You're a good manager. I'm going to let you manage more.
Yeah. You were great with five cities. I'm going to give you 10. Right. I'm going to give you another. You've created another 5. It's all you're going to get what someone else didn't manage well, because you're great at stewarding my resources.
Yeah.
You're great at stewarding and guiding my influence. And here's the part that for me is missed often on this, because sometimes we think of the reward as physical, like they got riches, they got wealth. They didn't. They got more responsibility. But what they did get, which is so incredibly important, is, and I'll read it from the Message Bible. His master replied, speaking to the servants, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'm going to put you in charge of many things. And then this is the line that we really need to get excited about. Come and share your master's happiness. They got to enter into something that they could never achieve with ownership. The only joy an owner has is in their possessions. Whereas stewards get to share in their master's happiness. They have everything the master has without actually it being theirs. But because they can approach it as stewards, it's all theirs, but it's not theirs. And that's kind of the incredible thing about God's kingdom. We have everything, but nothing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this place. But what we do get, and this to me is, again, we need to really recognize the greatest riches we could ever have is closeness to God, right? And entering into his joy and his happiness and participating in his vision and his mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Amazing. Really good.
And as a leader, understanding that should keep us, honed and able to continue to be faithful in the calling that God has placed on our lives, the purpose he's given us, without, white knuckling, grabbing on holding, always having to, kind of control, but to do it well.
Authentic spirituality. Bruce, for the first time in my life, I got a parable and then a bunch of bowls.
A bunch of bowls.
A bunch of bowls. Bowls. Yeah.
A bunch of bowls. Oh, okay.
A pair of bowls. And So this is really, really good. We're going to wrap this up. So just kind of wrap it up with authentic spirituality, vision, voice, and values. Where are we going next?
So we're going to talk about how humility flows in this.
The grease.
Yeah, the grease that kind of lubricates the gears. Because the reality is we never do this perfectly.
Yeah.
And we never engage with perfect people.
Right.
So how do we deal with opposition? How do we deal with people who are still growing in their understanding here? How do we just simply write them off? Do we, just get angry at them? Do we just, kind of digress into a command and control environment? Just do what I say. Don't ask me why, just do it. We need to learn from Jesus. Doing the right thing, leading well, always is more work. It always takes more time.
Excellent. Well, this has been just excellent, Bruce. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your kingdom leadership knowledge, and we're going to get more next time with you. This whole idea of authentic spirituality, vision, voice, and values, the need for all of them, the need for the humility, really, really good. So, and we get it. Like, we need it. Like, we know we're not perfect. The people we're connected to, we know they're not perfect. So all this coming together is really good. So thank you, Bruce, and thank you for listening as well. Those that are listening, and hopefully if you're driving your car, you can go back on the road now. We've shown all the goals you're going to see today. But find a way to live this out. Like, how are you listening to God? How are you getting his vision, the big bowl, the big kingdom bowl? And then how are you listening to hear his voice, and then living by his values? And so that's really awesome. So as I've already said, this is only the second lesson of 10 that Bruce has under this whole banner of kingdom leadership. And if you need this for yourself, for your business, for your church, for your network, get a hold of us. We'd love to come alongside you and walk you through this, because we had to learn it from others. It wouldn't be unlikely that you'll probably have to do that as well. So we're here for you. We want to facilitate you being successful in what God has called you to be. So thanks for tuning in today to Kingdomize the podcast. And don't forget to join us next week. But before you do that, what you need to do is you need to get a hold of other people and tell them to follow this. Let them follow what we're doing in our YouTube channel and Spotify. We need to keep the conversation going. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for listening. We've had a great day. We'll see you next week on Kingdomize the podcast. Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizeglobal.com. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.